Now that we have learned about the conservatism and how it happened, and we also know that there were different revolutionaries that were working in secret societies to overthrow these autocratic monarchical powers, this gave to the rise of the age of revolutions in the 1830 and 1840. So all the hard work of these secret societies to overthrow the monarchical power, they came forward with many revolutions, and in this part of the chapter, we'll be learning about all these revolutions. Let's get started. In response to conservative regimes consolidating control, liberalism and nationalism came to be increasingly associated with revolution. Okay, so idea of a nation state, all right, idea of a nation state, and the idea of everybody to be equal before law, all right, liberalism, equal before law. So, in the Italian states, in the German states, as well as in the provinces of the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, Ireland, and Poland. So, everybody they were united by this front. Then they had to overthrow the conservative regimes. This revolution was led forward by professors, commercial middle classes, educated middle class elites, and clerks inspired by nationalism. All right. So not only national heroes that were the part of the secret societies, but the new middle class, all right, the middle class, such as those industrialists, those professionals, as well as the educated people, such as those the professors and other students, all right, they came forward. Even some clerks, all right, they came forward to overthrow the conservative regime under the Louis Philippe. Under Louis Philippe I, France regained constitutional monarchy in 1830. So it was in 1830 under Louis Philippe's rule that France gained constitutional monarchy, means there was a certain right of the people as well. The July Revolution sparked an uprising in Brussels, which led to Belgium breaking away from the United Kingdom of Netherlands. So, in the following slides, we'll be learning about all those revolutions and all these, uprisings that led from one country to, be independent from the rule of the monarchical power. So, in the July Revolution sparked an uprising in Brussels. Okay, uprising in Brussels, which led to Belgium breaking away from the United Kingdom. And then an important event was the rise of nationalism in Greece. So Greece was the part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, but in 1821, when the revolution happened, Greece was then recognized as an independent country. Greece was the part of the Ottoman Empire since the 15th century. All right, so since the 1400s. All right, so for so long, for so many years, all right, Greece was under this Ottoman Empire. But when these idea of liberalism and nationalism came forward, all right, to overthrow this conservative regime, Greek revolution happened in 1821, and Greece was then declared an independent nation. Poets and artists, they had a very important role. Poets and artists, they fueled Greek nationalism by influencing public opinion against the Ottoman Empire. So of course the general public, the middle classes, they had this idea that a monarchy should go away, all right. So poets and artists, they had this era, which we'll also learn in the following slide, this romantic era, all right, in which poet, artists, so through literature, through representation, not just on paper but also in paintings, all right, the pictorial representation as well as the scriptural representation, it was the view of the common public, the opinion of the common public that was overheld, all right, and they sparked a lot of controversies. They sparked a lot of important controversies that ultimately led to the downfall of monarchies. The Treaty of Constantinople of 1832, it recognized Greece as an independent nation. The revolution happened in 1821 that led to Greece becoming independent, and it was ultimately in 1832 that this identity of an independent nation was handed over to Greece. The romantic imagination and national feelings, like I was telling you, that with arts and poets and even with music, storytelling, folklore, basically with literature, all right, with literature and other forms of expression, as the you can often see in paintings, in scriptures, sorry, not in scriptures, in sculptures, okay, a sense of nationalism or a nation arose. a cultural movement pioneered by romantic painters and poets attempted to establish a sense of community belonging by combining a nation's culture. So what these poets and what these painters did, they collected all the opinion, view of the common public who upheld the idea of the nation. So they brought forward these idea of nations in writing. And with the advent of the print culture, this writing was available to so many people. All right, so many people could read what others had to read. So many people could read that there are people like themselves who wanted this monarchical power to go away. So they, why not come and join in these secret societies, in these revolutions, so that um, a constitutional power could be established. Folk dancing as well, folk songs and folk poetry, they were also used to disseminate the spirit of German culture. Alright, it is utilized to communicate modern nationalistic fervors messages to a large number of people who are unable to read. So what there is the print culture, but there were many people who did not know how to read. So with the advancement of folk dances, folk poetry, singing, dancing, and other sorts of representation, with this representation, those people who did not read, that message could also reach to them. All right. So romantic, there is a period in romantic in literature, that is a romantic period, where you have poets such as Shelley, Keats, Wordsworth. If you have heard of these names, they were very important proponents in Europe, okay, especially in England. Than their writings that helped the idea of nationalism to reach forward. The German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder, he claimed that true German culture was to be discovered among the common people, das Buch. All right. So many philosophers as well, whose writings, whose publications, they were read by people, and this idea of this unity feeling could be, read by others. The Grimm brothers, if you have, come across the fairy tales by the Grimm brothers, it's a very interesting. The idea in this collection of fairy tales is also of the overthrowing of monarchical power. Either you go with very classics ones such as Rapunzel or Hansel and Gretel. The core idea, these are very simple. These may seem very simple folk tales, all right, but the core idea, if you try to think about it, they will be ultimately the overthrow, the overthrow of absolute power. Okay, they people, they had to enjoy their own freedom. People, they had to enjoy their right as to exist as an equal entity as others. All right, so this overthrow of absolute power is the core in the simple folk tales in that was consolidated by the Grimm brothers. They spent 6 years traveling from village to village, talking to people and writing down fairy tales. Poland was also partitioned by the great powers at the end of 18th century and was divided between Austria, Hungary, Prussia and Russia. So even though Poland did not it no longer existed as an independent nation because it was divided among so many nations, but still Poland, the identity of that national feeling, that was alive, it was kept alive through music and language. Alright, so as Poland was conquered by Russia and the Russian language was imposed, but still language, it kept on playing its role in keeping the fervor of nationalism alive in Poland. After a failed military rebellion against Russia in 1831, Poland, it began to use the Polish language as a symbol of defiance. All right, so you want to crush against, you want to crush me, all right, but you cannot crush my identity. That was their, that was their agenda. All right, that you cannot crush the identities of so many people that you have conquered, even though you impose your own language over us. Okay. Karol Karpinski celebrated the national struggle through his operas and music. He was a Polish person, and through using folk dances like the Polonaise and mazurka in nationalist symbols, he was a very important figure of nationalism. And through his folk dances and music and opera, he was able to put forward the nationalism of Poland. Let's talk about now hunger, hardship, and some other popular revolts. In Europe, the 1830s were a time of considerable economic suffering. Alright, with the advent of industrialization, what had happened is that some economic hardships, they were also started, coming up. What these were basically related to job prospects were scarce and job seekers, they were plentiful. Alright, So now that industries, many industries they came into place, so many people they were out of jobs, right? Because machines they had started taking the place. Okay, so there were many people who were jobless, and there was an there was an economic hardship, and of course when you don't have money, so you will be poor, and poverty leads to hunger. Okay, so there was hunger, and this economic hardship, it again culminated in a popular revolt. So cities have become suffocatingly crowded. What had happened since industrialization, they were there in the cities, all right. So many people they had migrated from villages to the city. Since cities they hold the power, they hold cities hold economy, all right. Cities hold those equipments of modernization. Okay, so people they migrated from villages to cities in search of job, but unfortunately they did not find job. So what will happen to poor people who did not have money? How are they going to survive in cities? They naturally a slum area then began to be formed. People started living in poor conditions in a very segregated in a suburban area, you may say. Okay, close to the city, but a sort of a suburban area where they used to live in very poor and very poor means, and in hunger and in poverty. Okay, so hungry and jobless citizens they poured out of their homes, forcing Louis Philippe, the king of France. There was a popular revolt happened in 1858, and he ultimately fled. He did not have that that capacity to deal with this so much crowd, and he ultimately he fled away from his position. Okay, he abdicated. So small town producers were frequently up against tough competition from imports of low cost machine. What was happening is that since machine had replaced human beings, so the labor, the kind of money that was being invested in all these industries, and the kind of output that they were getting was cheap as compared to man-made labor. Okay, or the kind of labors that was done by man himself, by his own hands and his own legs. Okay, so imports of low cost machine, what was happening in these towns was that or even in villages, what was happening is that low cost machine products they were being imported from places that were already very high in industrialization, or say in villages. And of course those people who were working day and night knitting, weaving and doing other sorts of things by their hands, their products, no one would buy a very costlier product, right? So people did not used to buy their products, but instead they went for the low cost machine items. So this industrialization, since this was advanced particularly in the textile industry, this led to a lot of people were rendered jobless. The National Assembly granted voting rights to males aged 21 and above, and declared Europe to be a republic. So what happened during this time? A lot of uprising was happened, a lot of revolt, hunger, poverty, this was taking place. So ultimately what the government did to satiate people was that they granted voting rights to males, all right, to all males aged 21. So the suffrage, if you remember that liberal nationalism, that suffrage was now incorporated to males as well, and that declared Europe to be a republic. That means again here there were no rights given to women. Okay, but since earlier there were only some property owning men that had the right of voting, now every man, be it they have property or not, they acquired the right to vote. In 1845, weavers in Salsia had revolted against temporary workers who delivered them raw weaving material and placed orders for them, but drastically reduced their payments. So all these hardships, all these revolts, they started happening in various places due to various reasons. Some mostly the core problem was industry. Something or the other happening or related to the industry was what was going on. All right. So in villages, 18,000 inhabitants, cotton weaving is the most widespread occupation. So if you say to all those people that now from now on you don't have to work, I have this equipment with me, and this is gonna work from me, and this is gonna produce a lot of products in a very in a very low cost, so I don't need all of you. So this is going to put all of these people in hunger, in poverty, right? This is what was happening. So on June 4 at 2 p.m., a large cloud of weavers, they emerged from their homes and they started demanding, right? They started demanding their rights. The contractor fled with his family to a neighboring village, which, however, refused to shelter such a person. All right. So they started demanding higher wages. All right. That you want to exploit us, we want to, make us jobless. So if you want to employ us in your, machine system, if you want to take our freedom, and employ your machines in order to do our works, then at least increase our wages. Otherwise, we'll go poor. Then came the revolution of the liberals in 1848. So the poor, unemployed and starving peasants, they started revolting against the government, and in 1848 a revolution came about. The events was that in France, a monarch's abdication took place and a republic based on universal male suffrage was declared. So basically the repetition of the other slide, that this revolt, it gave rise to French Republic, all right, and male suffrage was declared. So every male was given the right to vote, be it whether that male has property or whether that male does not have has property. But then again, women were still not given the right to vote. In Germany, Italy, Poland, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where nation states did not exist yet, men and women of liberal middle classes, they combined their demands for constitutionalism with national unification. Okay, so all these different sort of demands, all these different revolts, they started happening because the conservative government, they were not doing enough. All right. In the Frankfurt Parliament in Germany, what happened was that in German regions, a large number of political associations whose members were middle class professionals, those middle class people that new rising class apart from the aristocracy, right? The professionals, the businessmen, the educated people, all right, even artisans, they came together and they gathered in the city of Frankfurt and they decided to vote for an all German National Assembly. So again, a people representative, a parliament, all right, in the church of St. Paul. On 18 May 1848, 831 elected representatives marched in festive procession to make their places in the Frankfurt Parliament convened in the church of St. Paul. And there they drafted a constitution for the German nation to be headed by a monarchy subject to a parliament. Means that the government head would still be a monarch, but then some rights would be there given to the people as well, and that rights of people would be representative by this parliament. Okay, so they could not just outstrip the monarchs because they were the all powerful, they had power, they had wealth, all right. So they came to a compromise, they drafted a constitution that okay, you rule, okay, you be the monarch, but you will be subjected to a parliament. Means whatever the processions that would happen, now you won't have this absolute power. Now some rights of this people, of all the people, of all the citizens, would also be there for the national interest. The deputies offered the crown on the terms set by the Frankfurt parliaments to Frederick Wilhelm IV, the King of Prussia, but then he rejected the parliament. He said that no, I would be the monarch, and then he joined the other monarchs to oppose the elected assembly. So naturally, not everyone agreed, right? So this person, Frederick Wilhelm IV, he opposed this parliament system. And while the opposition of the aristocracy and military, they became stronger, the social basis of parliament eroded. So ultimately, this aristocracy, ultimately conservatism, all right, ultimately conservatism, they were able, these conservatives, they were able to destroy the social order of the parliament. Women then had formed organizations and participated in the revolutionary movement, but of course, since women were given no rights to vote, so their participation was nullified. They were like, you have not been given any right to vote. So whatever you may want to protest, we will not take into account. Okay. So when the Frankfurt Parliament convened in the Church of St. Paul, women were admitted only as observers to stand in the visitors' gallery. All right. So this was the plight of women. So much, detrimental, so much, parochial, that they were not at all even given the right to stand in the protests. Okay. Another impact is that monarchs were beginning to realize that this cycle of revolution and repression, this would keep on happening and happening and happening, and it can only be ended by granting liberal nationalist revolutionary. Well, something has to be happened, and this can be ended. I mean, this revolution, this repression can be ended only by granting some concession, some compromise. That means has to be achieved. So hence, in the years after 1848, the autocratic monarchies of Central and Eastern Europe, they began to introduce the changes that had already been taking place in Western Europe before 1815. All right, changes regarding to the serfdom. So the serfdom and bonded labor, if you may remember, in the western part of Europe, that had already been abolished. But because the Treaty of Vienna was signed in 1815 towards the central and the eastern part of Europe, so they had not yet, done away with this primitive habit. But then they had to, reach to some sort of compromise, some concession. So serfdom and bonded labor were finally abolished both in the Habsburg dominions and in Russia, and the Habsburg rulers then granted more autonomy to the Hungarians in 1867. So they were like, okay, you want us to go away, but we can't do it. So let's come to a compromise. We will offer you some sort of liberty. You be happy and let us rule. That was the kind of compromise, that was the kind of concession they came to. Discuss the impact of art, music, and literature. So we have seen that art, music, and literature, it has, played a very pivotal role. Pivotal role in what? Pivotal role in spreading nationalism. Okay, in spreading nationalism. And how has this happened? This has happened thanks to the print culture. And if not the print culture, those people who can't read, for them we have the music. All right, we have the folk dance. All right, so all of these they worked forward to propagate the idea of nationalism. And how they propagated nationalism by putting forward the public opinion. All right, they put forward the public opinion. They wrote things, or they represented things that were that was interest to the culture, that spoke of some solidification of nationhood, some unity. Okay, some unity. All right, so impact of art, music, and literature was that it made a pivotal role in spreading nationalism. How it did that? It did that by the help of music, folk dance, and literature. All right, language and everything. So they started voicing people's opinion. They started objecting. They started questioning the people in power, the monarchs in power. They wanted to do they wanted them to go away, and they wanted a solidification, a unification, or a nation, a nationalistic idea to take place instead of the monarchical rule. So this was the section in which you saw that what were the impacts of the different nations, what was the impact of the different nations, how they responded to the conservatism. Okay, what was their response, how was revolutionary carried forward, and how the monarchy and say the revolutionaries, they were able to come to some sort of compromise. So the conservatism is still there, conservatives are still there, but some pivotal role has happened. And through the music of art, through the process of art, music, literature, and through the process of protests, revolts, and formations of secret societies, at least they were able to grant some representative in the um, in the in the government. Now we will be discussing the making of Germany and Italy. We have learned that there has been some, going on with the powers of the monarch and the autocracy, and we know that there were some revolutions going on that wanted these conservatives to go away. All right, so a lot of accusations and a lot of suppressions happened, a lot of compromise happened, and then ultimately some countries such as Germany and Italy, they were able to retrieve themselves from the captures of these, from the strongholds of these monarchical power. So let's learn about the making of the Germany and Italy. Unification of Germany. In May 1848, Germany's rapidly emerging middle class attempted to unify various German kingdoms that had been crushed by kings and rich people. Alright, and after the failure of German National Assembly, it was Prussian Chief Minister Otto von Bismarck that took the lead to German unification. So this Prussian chief minister, he said that I would come forward if nobody is willing to do so, and I would take the onus of unifying all those various German kingdoms that were under the control of kings and landowners. So this Prussian chief minister Otto von Bismarck, he conducted three wars with France, Austria, and Denmark, and over 7 years. It took 7 years for Russia to achieve that autonomous existence. The process was completed with the crowning of Caesar William I as king of the Germany. So Otto von Bismarck led this role, but it was ultimately Caesar William I that he became the first king of Germany. All right, a one nation head of Germany was established. Who was Caesar William II? William II was the last German emperor and king of Prussia, ruling the German Empire and Kingdom of Prussia from 15 June 1888 to 9th November 1918. What happened afterwards? In the newly formed Germany, a lot of emphasis was placed on modernizing the currency and the banking, legal, and the judicial system. So Prussia was ultimately, after another war took place, and parts of Prussia was ultimately divided between some nations. All right, but till this part, Prussia was there, and Caesar William II, he was the last German emperor and king of Prussia, and he ruled from this date 15 June 1888 to 9th November 1988. And during his rule, modernization was focused upon all the banking, legal, and the judicial processes was focused upon. So basically, that nationalistic idea of Germany, it was to be put forward, and it was to be put forward by modernizing. All right, modernizing. Then let's talk about unification of Italy. Italy, like Germany, had a lengthy history of political fragmentation. Only one of the states of Italy, Sardinia, Piedmont, was controlled by Italian dynasty. Rest were either the head of the center, that means the central part of Italy, that was governed by the Pope. All right. Then in the southern part, you had the Spains. All right, you had the Spain. There was this kingdom. There was this a Bourbon dynasty of Spain that was ruling in the southern part, and in the northern part you have the Austrian Habsburgs. All right. So in Italy, only one part, that is the Sardinia Piedmont, was actually being ruled by Italian dynasty. All right. In the northern part, you have the Austrian Habsburgs. In the central part, the popes were ruling, and in the southern part, the Bourbon dynasty of Spain was ruling. Okay. Then you have seen this name Giuseppe Mazzini, that how much of a national hero he was. He formed the secret society that spread like a wildfire for overthrowing the monarchy. So Giuseppe Mazzini first proposed the idea of Italian unification through his Young Italy secret society, and following his failed revolutions in 1831 and 1848, the king of Sardinia, Victor Emmanuel II, took the reins. So it was through Victor Emmanuel II that Italy actually achieved its unification. Chief Minister of Sardinia, Count Cavour, forged a diplomatic alliance with France to overcome Austria and unite Italy's northern territory. So what happened is that Italy alone could not alone overthrow Austrian power. So it formed an alliance with France. It said that you help me, all right, to overthrow this, and then we'll be in peace. Okay. So Italy formed an alliance with the help of Count Cavour. He was the chief minister of Sardinia, and then he was able to overthrow the Austrian power. In the southern region, Giuseppe Garibaldi, another important person, he enlisted the help of local peasants to overthrow the Spanish overlords. All right, and with the coronation of Victor Emmanuel II as King of Italy in 1861, the process of unification was achieved. So Count Cavour, what he did, he overthrew the Austrian power in the north, the Habsburg Empire, with the help of French. All right, and towards the southern part, Giuseppe Garibaldi was the person, and he enlisted the help of local people, local peasants, to overthrow the Spanish warlords. Major figures, we have Giuseppe Mazzini. We have already heard of this. Let's revise. Mazzini was the Republican Party's chairman. There was a party formed for the Republic of Italy, and Mazzini, was the chairman. He is regarded as the forerunner of Italy unification because he was the first person who propagated the nationalistic idea of Italy by the formation of all those secret societies. He tried to unite Italy via education. Okay, founder of the Young Italy secret society. Then you have Giuseppe Garibaldi. Garibaldi is also known as the hero of the red shirts. He is known as the sword of Italian unification. He first invaded Sicily and urged them to join Victor Emmanuel's freedom on Sardinia. So what he did, Garibaldi was actually procuring people to come under Emmanuel's reign, Emmanuel's army, and help the people of Italy to achieve freedom. He handed over all conquered lands to Victor Emmanuel that could enable Emmanuel to fight against the popes and finally achieve victory. He was able to gain the support of the Italian peasants. Count Camillo de Cavour, like you had seen in the earlier slide, that he, with the help of the French alliance, overthrew the Austrian people. So Count Cavour, the chief minister of Piedmont, assisted the monarch in creating an alliance with France. In 1859, they overcame the Austrian soldiers. He was an Italian statesman and a key participant in the Italian unification movement. Then there was the unification of Britain into Great Britain. Alright, Britain was not a nation state before the 18th century. Its identity was based on disparate ethnicity, alright, ethnicities such as English, Welsh, and Irish and Scots. So Ireland, Irish, Welsh, England, and from Scotland, Scots. The English nation began to dominate the other nations as its wealth and power grew. This, because England was such a dominant colonial power. All of you know this, all right. India was also under rule of England. So even towards, as regarding to its own adjacent countries, England was still the dominant power, and English parliamentary overthrew the monarchy in 1688. All right. So in 1688, some parliament was formed in consolidation with the monarchy. All right. The Act of Union passed by Parliament in 1707 that united England and Scotland, culminating in the foundation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. So what happened in this Act of Union is that England basically it sort of conquered Scotland. A lot of Scottish did not want to come under England, but because England was such a big colonial power and it had so much of power, be it in wealth and be it in territories, that Scotland had to come under its reign, and then they united into one sort of nation head, United Kingdom of Great Britain. But even after being in this unity, the dominant identity or the dominant nation head was of English. English dominated the parliament, and the Scots' political and their cultural identities were systematically suppressed. When Catholics in Scotland, they attempted to voice their opinions, they were brutally suppressed. The Catholic clans that inhabited the Scottish Highlands, they suffered terrible repression when they attempted to assert their independence. So basically, England was able to subdue. Okay, England subdued Scotland. All right. How? Through the formation of the United Kingdom of Britain. The Scottish Highlanders were forbidden to speak their Gaelic language or wear the national dress, and large numbers were forcibly driven out of their homeland. So England went to such extremes. Why? All of it, like I have been telling you till now, all of it, to keep its supremacy intact, to have that greed, to have that enjoyment of the thrill of being the powerful one. Okay. Ireland, after a failed revolt led by Wolfe Tone and his United Irishmen in 1798, Ireland was forcibly incorporated into United Kingdom in 1801. So after Scotland, who became the part of United Kingdom? Ireland. The English language was, as usual, actively promoted. Both Scotland and Ireland, they were subjected to the English monarchy. England was the dominant one. England was the dominant one, and they subjugated. Okay, they subjugated Scotland as well as Ireland. The Scottish identity and the Irish identity. Great efforts were made to impose British cultural markers on Scotland and Ireland. Now, let's end this session by the discussion of unification and division of Italy. So we knew that Italy, there was only one part one small part, the Piedmont Sardine part, that was actually being ruled by the Italian dynasty. But the major part, that means the northern part, that was ruled by the Austrian Habsburg Empire. All right. Austrian Habsburg Empire. Okay. Then the central part was being ruled by popes. Okay. And the southern part of Italy was being ruled by Spain. Remember that Bourbon dynasty. Okay. And how did Italy manage itself to, form a unique, a nationalistic fervor? It happened by people such as Mazzini. All right. It happened by people such as Garibaldi. Then, of course, that the Count Cavour. Okay. And that Victor Emmanuel II, the actual ruler that was ultimately able to bring about the unification of Italy. Okay, so these people, all right. Okay, so let's talk about division of Italy. Northern part was ruled by the Austrian Habsburg Empire. Central part was being ruled by the popes, and the southern part was being ruled by the Spanish dynasty, mainly the Bourbon dynasty. So what these rulers, sorry, not rulers, what these revolutionaries they did, Mazzini, he the secret society, right? Mazzini educated people and he started to form secret societies. Garibaldi, the red shirts, he united the local peasants and he united them to overthrow the southern Spanish rulers. Okay, then Count Cavour, with the help of France, with keeping France as the alliance, Count Cavour was able to outthrow the northern Austrian Habsburg Empire. And what did Victor Emmanuel II do? By whatever territories and whatever army that especially Garibaldi handed over to Victor Emmanuel II, he was finally able to outthrow the central authority of the popes in the central Italy, the authority of the popes in the central Italy, and then it was ultimately with his coronation that Italy achieved its unification. So I hope this section on the creation of Germany and Italy, the unification, the idea of nationalistic Germany and Italy, that is clear to you. So we were discussing the last concept, the other last two concepts in the second part of the chapter, in the other part of the chapter. But till this part, I hope that the unification as well as the division process first, but then again the unification and finally the creation of Germany and Italy is clear.